I want to play for you a clip, an NBC News clip from the year 1988, January 1st, 1988. And it's called Ed Meese's Middle Eastern oil deal. Because to circle back on the purpose of what I'm trying to, the universe we're going to be traveling through tonight, is I think that people have been, even really, really, really experienced experts who've studied Jeffrey Epstein their whole, every day, all day, for years and years and years. I think they misunderstand what Epstein was. I think, and I've talked about this, like, I think Whitney Webb is a fantastic researcher. I think that she does a great job finding hard to get information and trying to sense make and put together. And like I said, I got halfway through her first book and thought this just isn't right. You've got the right facts and the wrong analysis. Yeah, I don't think in the book there's really evidence of there was no halfway through the book called One Nation Under Blackmail. There's no blackmail. None. There's no blackmail in the book called One Nation Under Blackmail. So now there's a lot of organized crime. There's a lot of illicit activity. There's a lot of money laundering. There's a lot of bankers. There's a lot of government agencies. But there's no blackmail. How do you write a book called One Nation Under Blackmail without showing the evidence of the blackmail? It's the wrong thesis for understanding Epstein's intelligence role. Jeffrey Epstein was a financier. He was a guy who connected people to guys who had money. He was a liaison between someone who needed money and someone who had money. He was a broker. Lottie presents his Benz. How about the photos used by J.B. Hoover? Isn't that blackmail? J. Edgar Hoover. Now, you look, if you want, we could play the we could play the game where we go from J. Edgar Hoover to Roy Cohn to Tibor Rosenbaum to Jeffrey Epstein. But those are different things. There's no evidence, and I'm not saying it didn't happen. The stage was certainly set for something like that to potentially happen in terms of collecting all of that. But what I've been trying to say all along is think about how stupid it would be. The blackmail story doesn't even make sense to me. It makes sense to me if the blackmail was done by a different group of people than Epstein, who Epstein was connected to and potentially sending it on to. For example, if he sent it on to we know, when we're going to get to this, when we get to the case studies part of this, because what I want to do tonight is I want to do case studies. I'm working on a video that you guys will see later this week. It's called 10 CIA financial fixer archetypes for DOJ to bear in mind as it pursues answers to Jeffrey Epstein's intelligence links. And we're going to see, when we go through the Robert Mayhew story, how blackmail type situations, sexual blackmail, how to look at that from a CIA perspective. But the point that I'm driving at right now is, if you understand Epstein's role as a financial fixer, a broker between parties that need money and parties that have money, you'll see how adding blackmail to that would be a stupid thing for Epstein to do. Because you want those people having fun. You want them making money. You want them having crazy, unique experiences being around you so that they want to do deals with you. You offer them access to things that they want, but they can't normally get, either because they don't have access to it, or they don't know the people or it's illegal. He offers you a private island. That's an experience. He offers you access to young women who are willing to have sex with you. That's an experience. If you are a billionaire, a 62-year-old billionaire, you're not going to meet an 18-year-old girl at a bar and, be able to pick her up or whatever. Like, you need in network. Being around Jeffrey Epstein meant being around girls. So you want to be around Jeffrey Epstein if you're an old guy with money. And so you'll want to do long-term deals with Jeffrey Epstein. You want to get in bed with Epstein for business deals because that's what gives you a chance to meet beautiful girls who are willing to sleep with you. Listen, I've told you guys about a previous chapter in my life when I was organizing events in New York City and throwing big parties and stuff like that. As like a 26, 27-year-old or party organizer, I knew that. I was trying to throw parties in part because I was trying to make business contacts with people in the New York City art world. But if you want to get cool guys there and wealthy patrons there, it's not really a party unless you got girls there. So you got to have your girlfriends invite their girlfriends who invite their girlfriends. I've been to a lot of these LA parties with, big influencers and stuff like that. They have pipeline recruiters for girls that they don't know, girls that they find on Instagram, girls that nobody else at the party knows. But they go and they show up to the LA parties because there's basically a pipeline supplier guy. Doesn't mean that, they're doing that for an illegal purpose. They're doing it because of the following. Say it with me. Girls, juice, deals. You want a billionaire, a Saudi arms dealer, a Spanish prince, a high-level military general in Egypt or Cairo to get involved in a 20-year pipeline project with you. You want to create the conditions that being around you is fun. It gives you a currency that you can't get somewhere else, that you can't get access to girls unless you are doing deals with Jeffrey Epstein. There's lots of reasons to do this beyond like sexual blackmail. Even last week we went over the Adnan Khashoggi story. And I played that long clip from that podcast going over the history of Adnan Khashoggi, the biggest arms dealer in the world, at one point potentially the richest guy in the world. The middleman, the Saudi middleman between the U.S. and Israel for Iran-Contra. Here's what Adnan Khashoggi looked like, to remind you guys. Does this look like a girl magnet to you? Does this look like, a guy who is just picking up chicks at the club? He's in the club. He's talking about that yacht. You think this guy walks into a club and, a bunch of 21-year-old girls or 19-year-old girls in short skirts starts, oh, my God, I don't know who you are, but I'm just attracted to your magnetic 5'1", 200-pound personality. No. But Adnan Khashoggi was constantly, so he would bring hundreds of women to his parties. He would pawn them off on his friends and business partners, and they would do business with him for years and years and years because this man brought the babes. This man, who in Jeffrey Epstein's own words, was one of his key clients when he went out on his own, starting in 1981, right after Iran overthrew the U.S. government. Jeffrey Epstein in 1987, in the middle of Iran-Contra, said his financial bounty hunter financial clients for his financial bounty hunter service, sheltering assets, laundering money, setting up offshore bank accounts, was Adnan Khashoggi. He probably learned a thing or two from Adnan Khashoggi and the way Khashoggi did business when he was a young guy in his late 20s, early 30s. Khashoggi was never busted, for underage sex trafficking, I don't believe. But the point is this happened before with the DynCorp scandal, by the way. DynCorp child sex trafficking. Above the law, sex trafficking by private military contractor DynCorp. Okay. So in 2000, employees of DynCorp, one of the mega military contractor, was involved in trafficking women from Eastern Europe into forced prostitution in Bosnia. Now, what happened in the DynCorp scandal was the military contractor was doing business with Saudi sheikhs, extremely high net worth members of the military in Egypt, in Morocco, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Eastern Europe. And they wanted to make their clients happy by speaking the currency that they liked. So they were doing this to juice deals. This whole sex trafficking thing was not because they were pedophiles. It was because the language of their Middle Eastern clients was pretty women. So to juice the deals and get more military contracts, they would provide a pipeline of young women. The pedophilia was not on the U.S. side of this. The prostitution was because that is what juiced the deals, which is a very different thing than blackmail. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because everyone understands why a spy agency would want blackmail material on high net worth individuals and heads of state. I think what far, 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 far fewer people understand is that spy agencies want financial facilitators much more than they want blackmail material. They need a deal maker who is able to broker deals that the U.S. government does not want to be seen as brokering, but that they want to happen in the world because it advances U.S. interests, as we say. Advances the interests of insiders. But that is what we say. We want this pipeline to be constructed. We want this economic integration zone to be constructed. But some of our other partners would be very upset if they thought we were the ones behind it. So it has to be negotiated covertly. So it's handled by CIA instead of the State Department. And the CIA needs someone to covertly broker the deal and to shelter the transaction, cloak it in offshore bank accounts and complex debt instruments to launder the money so that it doesn't look like the U.S. government had anything to do with it. They need financial fixers. And so let me start this by giving you guys a couple of archetypes to keep in mind. And then I'm going to do a formal presentation on this week without the Comet Pizza hat. And as you watch this, tell me how many of you knew about this scandal from 1988. Ed Meese was the Attorney General for Ronald Reagan. This video has 8 views. Let this wash over you.
I'm John Hart. Derek is off tonight. It began with an unusual briefing at the White House. Special Prosecutor James McKay informing the president's aides that Attorney General Edwin Meese was being investigated for his role in an oil pipeline deal in Iraq. A close friend of Meese had a financial interest in the deal. The Los Angeles Times reported a memo by the friend that suggested a payoff to an Israeli official to make sure Israel would not sabotage the pipeline. Today, the New York Times reported the independent prosecutor told the White House Meese played a sustained and important role in promoting the project. Meese's attorney says no laws were broken. The White House says the president has full confidence in Meese. We have two reports. First, from Robin Lloyd.
Meese addressed a conservative youth group this afternoon, but said nothing about the investigation. As he left, reporters were kept at a distance by angry supporters of the Attorney General. Even though Meese was avoiding reporters, the president's chief of staff, Howard Baker, was out in public strongly defending the Attorney General and squelching any rumors that he might be asked to resign.
Now, this is the Attorney General caught up in this scandal. That would be the equivalent of Pam Bondi today, or Bill Barr under Trump 1, or Merrick Garland under Joe Biden. That was who was embroiled in this scandal.
The president has authorized Marlon Fitzwater to say, and he has said that he continues to have full confidence in his Attorney General.
But privately, White House officials are concerned about the investigation. Sources have told NBC News that Special Prosecutor James McKay has shown Chief of Staff Baker a 1985 memo addressed to Meese suggesting a scheme to pay off Israeli officials. The memo came from Meese's old friend, Robert Wallach. Wallach reportedly proposed to Meese that Israeli officials be given money as an incentive for Israel not to attack a proposed oil pipeline in Iraq, in which Wallach had financial interests. Meese has denied that he ever approached any Israeli official on this matter and has said that he did not promote the project. While defending Meese, White House officials are staying clear of the details.
I don't have any knowledge whatsoever. It's a matter before the independent counsels, and we'll just have to wait and see how that work progresses.
But sources confirm a New York Times story today that McKay has told senior White House officials that Meese had a, quote, important and sustained role in pushing the billion-dollar pipeline project. What's at issue is a federal law which makes the Attorney General responsible for prosecuting American citizens who try to bribe foreign officials. House Majority Leader Foley was asked if Meese should step aside during the investigation.
Whether the Attorney General continues in office is a matter for him and for the President to decide.
Aides say the President is strongly supporting his old friend and is adamant that Meese should not resign.
I see no reason on earth for the President to take any action unless and until it is made to appear that Mr. Meese has done something wrong.
Officials here say they have no indication at this time that McKay intends to indict Meese, but they admit that the special prosecutor has not ruled that out. Robin Lloyd, NBC News at the White House.
All right, General.
In this latest controversy, Meese finds himself caught up in an international web of big oil, big influence, and big money. In 1983, as the Persian Gulf War grew hotter, Iraq looked for a safer way to get its oil out of the Gulf. A plan was devised for a billion-dollar pipeline that would stretch from Iraqi oil fields through Jordan onto the Red Sea, passing within miles of the Israeli border. The pipeline was to be built by the U.S. firm Bechtel. But before Bechtel or anyone would put money into the project, they wanted assurances from then Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres that Israel would not attack the pipeline. Bechtel hired Bruce Rappaport, a Swiss businessman with strong ties to Peres. Rappaport, in turn, hired San Francisco lawyer E. Robert Wallach, a close friend of Attorney General Meese. And that's where the Meese connection and his troubles begin. It is a 1985 memo from Wallach to Meese that reportedly talks about payoffs to Israelis for protection of the pipeline. But in a Jerusalem newspaper today, Peres denied he was offered a bribe. And in a telephone interview from Switzerland, Bruce Rappaport also denied any bribery attempt.
All I can tell you is that I have never, nor would I even dream. I don't think that anybody could dare to propose to Shimon or anybody else like that money in Israel.
Meanwhile, Special Prosecutor James McKay is also investigating any possible connection between Rappaport and late CIA Director William Casey, as well as the role played by the National Security Council. Sources say then National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane is considered a witness, not a target in that probe. U.S. officials say the irony in all this is that by the time any alleged bribes were discussed in 1985, Iraq had already decided to send its pipeline through Turkey instead. So Meese finds himself in trouble over a pipeline that was never built. Jim Miklashevsky, NBC News, Washington.
Now, why did we watch this 5-minute and 15-second clip here? We're back to our favorite characters, William Casey, who created Ned. Now understand, during this whole period from 1979 to 1988, the private CIA structure that we live under was established. Coming out of the Carter reforms, the CIA was increasingly privatized in order to circumvent the handcuffs put on the CIA during the late 70s. And in this scandal, we should probably diagram this out. I have half a mind to open Photoshop, but let me read you a little sec here. Let me move this actually up top, and then we're going to, just so I don't forget this, one sec. Okay, let's go to, okay. We're going to go to this document here. Found this on CIA.gov. This is the New York Times article that came out that same day. Pipeline deal, intrigue in high places. Hold on, let me move this down. Now, this cuts off, but you can see that the CIA took an interest in this article for reasons that you are about to see. I'm going to go to the web archive. And we're going to read a couple different variations of it. So here is this article that the CIA flagged on CIA.gov. They had to declassify in part. Notice that this page denied is because this is going to have a CIA cover letter analyzing to either the CIA director or to the head of a particular subdivision in the CIA analyzing this memo. So that is still evidently classified, what the CIA had to say about this New York Times article. They've declassified the part that's public, the actual New York Times article. Okay? Now let me explain to you why this is how you should understand the Epstein story. And we're going to go through like 10 examples of this tonight. We're going to start with Bruce Rappaport. You'll see that this was A1 front page in January 1998 in the New York Times. Pipeline deal, intrigue in high places. Cover story. Shortly after Rear Admiral John Poindexter became National Security Advisor in December 1985. Now again, National Security Advisor is the highest ranking position in the cabinet. The Secretary of State is the head of the State Department. The Director of Central Intelligence is the head of the CIA. The Secretary of Defense is the head of the military. The National Security Advisor is the head of all three from the White House side. Defense, diplomacy, and intelligence. Because the National Security Advisor runs the National Security Council, which is the White House policy council that the State Department, the Defense Department, and the CIA have to carry out the activities of. So this is the highest person in government other than the president. In December 1985, shortly after Poindexter became National Security Advisor in 85, and Poindexter would go down for the Iran-Contra scandal. But he says, shortly before that, a predecessor in the job offered him sober advice about a $1 billion Iraqi oil pipeline project that was supported by the National Security Council and by President Reagan. William Clark, the administration's second national security advisor and close friend of the president, warned Admiral Poindexter and his aides, "This project has become a nightmare. Self-interested intermediaries were trying to manipulate the national security policy of the United States to their advantage," he told them. So the U.S. national security state, represented by the highest body, the National Security Council, the White House Interagency as it's known, the State Department, the Defense Department, the CIA, the President of the United States all wanted Iraq to build this oil pipeline, to economically integrate it. Again, we had a complicated relationship with Iraq at the time because Iraq was against Iran just like we were, but we wanted deeper control over Iraq, so we didn't like Saddam Hussein. But so one national security advisor says to the other, self-interested intermediaries were trying to manipulate the national security policy to make more money for themselves. Admiral Poindexter quickly moved to close down the secret project. The secret project. The secret project. Covert. So everyone supported this project. They wanted the deal done. The National Security Council, the President of the United States, but they kept it a secret, which had been debated for more than 2 years at the highest levels of the American, Israeli, Iraqi, and Jordanian governments. So you have 4 different government intelligence services trying to negotiate in secret an oil pipeline that would have profound economic implications on both the economy and security of all 4 countries. Special prosecutor, now more than 2 years later, a special prosecutor investigating Attorney General Edwin Meese has focused his diplomatically sensitive investigation on the role played in the project by Mr. Meese, the Attorney General, that would be our Pam Bondi equivalent, or our Bill Barr equivalent, by Israel, by the Central Intelligence Agency, and by E. Robert Wallach, a close friend of the Attorney General, who had a financial interest in the pipeline. But the story of the pipeline is more than just a criminal investigation that is complicating the Attorney General's deeply troubled tenure. A month-long review of government documents and interviews with dozens of present and former administration officials illustrates how private commercial interests could, at least for a while, unduly influence decision-making at the highest level of the United States government. This is the donor-drafter class. They're arguing the donor-drafter class is drafting off of U.S. government policy being set by the government and potentially getting the government to do something that's not in U.S. national interest because they're donors, they're close friends, but they are making money off of the activity their donees, their close friends are doing. The New York Times inquiry has uncovered new details about the tangled pipeline deal, including these. The special prosecutor, James McKay, is investigating the relationship between William Casey, the CIA director, and Bruce Rappaport. Now, William Casey, who's kind of the creator of the private CIA complex that we live under. If George Kennan was the creator of the CIA as it existed from 1947 to 1976, Bill Casey was sort of the creator of the CIA as it has existed from 1981 to present. The special prosecutor, James McKay, is investigating the relationship between William Casey, who was the CIA director from 1981 to 1987, and Bruce Rappaport, a Swiss businessman with ties to Israel who was a principal in the project, according to officials. They add that Mr. McKay, the special prosecutor, is also examining how information about Mr. Rappaport contained in Central Intelligence Agency files was not provided to some officials who had questions about him and had asked the CIA. Okay? So as you'll see, Bruce Rappaport is best friends with William Casey. They're golfing buddies. They're talking all the time. They've got weirdly overlapping financial deals. And let me take one more detour to note Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Burns. Jeffrey Epstein met 3 times in 2014 with CIA Director Bill Burns, who even went to Jeffrey Epstein's house twice in 2014. Burns first met with Epstein in Washington, D.C. in 2014 when Burns was Deputy Secretary of State, number 2 at the State Department. Now, what was Burns' job before that? He was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. We've talked about this many times, but for those who are new here, we'll say it again. Why was Bill Burns made the CIA director after Tom Donilon declined? Bill Burns had never worked a day in the CIA. How was he made CIA director? How did he know how the CIA worked to even run it as director if he had never worked in intelligence? He had been a State Department official the whole time. Well, the answer is he was the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. That's the number 3 position at the State Department. The ranking order goes Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary of State, and then Undersecretary for Political Affairs. In the chain of command in any U.S. embassy, it's the ambassador who is the number 1. If the ambassador is out of town or has a schedule conflict, the deputy is the chargé d'affaires. If the deputy is out, then the Undersecretary for Political Affairs becomes the chargé d'affaires. Okay? But the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, that's the head of the Political Affairs section, is the person who is in charge of the CIA aspect of the State Department. $20 from Chesterton777. Thank you, Chesterton777. Appreciate the support tonight, guys. As we saw in our JFK files research, the 15-page memo from Arthur Schlesinger to JFK in October or June 1961 had Arthur Schlesinger present his findings that 48% of all staff in the political affairs section of the State Department were not even State Department officials. 48% of the State Department employees were not even State Department officials. They were CIA working under diplomatic cover. 48% in 1961. And he gave specific examples like Vienna and France, where in some political affairs embassies, the political affairs section was 80 to 90% of CIA operating under diplomatic cover. Arthur Schlesinger fingered to JFK that it was the political affairs section through which the CIA was able to usurp power and control from the State Department and set its own State Department foreign policy, even if that's not what the White House wanted, because the CIA controlled the political affairs branch. And Bill Burns was a political affairs guy his whole time. I read his biography. He was the head of I'm not sure if they have this in the up top, but let's just go to Russia. Before he was ambassador to Russia, before he became the U.S. ambassador to Russia, the Michael McFaul equivalent, he was the head of political affairs in the Moscow embassy. Political affairs, Russia, 1990s. Well, you can look this up. It's in his biography, autobiography. Okay. So he was the guy running the CIA side of the State Department his whole career at State. Then he leaves the State Department in 2014 to run the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the oldest think tank in the country. That's 2014. He runs it from 2014 to 2021. And in 2021, he becomes Director of Central Intelligence, head of the CIA. Okay? But the year that he leaves State to head one of the most powerful endowments in the world and the oldest think tank in the country, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace needs money, needs donors. So we've talked about Bill Burns has got in trouble with close ties to China, okay? Bill Burns, the Carnegie Endowment, received millions of dollars from a CCP front, Chinese businessman with close links to the CCP, who himself leads a group that explicitly says that its job is to advance the policy objectives set out by the CCP. Put that CCP guy on the board of Carnegie, created a Carnegie Tsinghua Center. This is because your job when you run an NGO or an endowment is to raise money from people who have money to support things they want to get done with their money. So as soon as Bill Burns decides he's going to run the Carnegie Endowment now, where he'll make a lot more money than running the State Department, he wants to raise money from outside donors for the Carnegie Endowment. He wants a financial fixer to arrange money for the Carnegie Endowment. So who does he meet with? He meets with Jeffrey Epstein, the man who's connected to money. He first meets him when he's Deputy Secretary of State, but then he travels twice to Jeffrey Epstein's New York townhouse, the infamous New York townhouse. Twice in 2014, Bill Burns, now the new head of the Carnegie Endowment, goes to the personal residence 2 times to have a private, in-person conversation with Jeffrey Epstein, who had been indicted for underage prostitution in 2008. Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex predator in 2014. He did get indicted in Florida. He got a sweetheart plea deal. But why would the guy running the CIA side of the State Department, who would go on to run the CIA itself, go to Jeffrey Epstein's personal townhouse twice to meet in person rather than having a phone call that could be tracked and traced? Do you think Bill Burns was going there for, 16-year-old girls hanging around? No. Bill Burns is going there to raise money for the Carnegie Endowment. And he knows that Jeffrey Epstein can arrange for donors to donate to the Carnegie Endowment if he can convince Jeffrey Epstein that what Carnegie will do with that money will advance the interests of the donors. But just like Epstein is meeting in person multiple times with the CIA director, it was the same thing with Bruce Rappaport and William Casey. Back to the New York Times article. Well, Unangan says asset. No. That is the opposite of what I'm trying to tell you guys. There is asset has a technical meaning. And this word asset is going to fuck up this whole thing if people don't understand this. This is a facilitator. A CIA facilitator. What they'll call a cooperative contact. A liaison. Not an asset. Let me do a brief detour here. Now let me explain this to you, because this is where they're going to try to hoodwink you. This is the heart of the matter. There's something called a 201 file. Okay? There's a file that's kept on all assets. And I want to just go through this with you here, okay? The human intelligence food chain. Asset is recruited in the CIA asset validation system. It's recorded in a database. There's an annual revalidation. and there is a counterintelligence check. There's a need to vet their links to foreign intelligence, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Everyone who's a formal asset or who's an agent gets a 201 file on them. They are an asset, formally. Okay? But there are levels to working with the CIA, but not formally working for the CIA, where there is no 201 file. Okay? I'm going to go through some of these levels. There's a cooperative contact, someone who wittingly responds to tasking, but is unwilling to enter a controlled clandestine relationship. Co-optee, a private individual who assists on a temporary or opportunistic basis. Ad hoc help. For example, arranging a charter flight, passing a suitcase. They are not considered formally assets. They are a friend of the station. And then there are liaisons, facilitators, business intermediaries, friends of the station, casual quid pro quo relationships, occasionally helpful, never formally recruited. This is what I'm trying to describe to you about Jeffrey Epstein. So when Alex Acosta is asked in footnote 244 of the, how do you square these two statements? Alex Acosta tells the Trump transition team that he gave Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart plea deal because he was told to back off because Epstein belongs to intelligence and to leave it alone because it was above his pay grade, with the fact that when 12 years later, when the DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility asks him, do you have any knowledge that Epstein was an intelligence asset, in quotes, direct quotes, and Acosta answers, the answer is no. How are those two statements consistent? Well, in a deposition, you answer the literal question asked of you. You don't expound on it. For example, if you are deposed and you didn't brush your teeth today, and the person asking you the questions in the deposition says, did you brush your teeth? And you want to hide the fact that you didn't brush your teeth today, and they ask you, did you brush your teeth? You say, yes. Because they didn't ask you, did you brush your teeth today? So if you ask someone in a deposition, did you brush your teeth? And they say, yes, I brushed my teeth. Your second question should be, did you brush your teeth today? No. When Alex Acosta is asked, as he is in the, I'll show you right here. We covered this last stream, but we'll just do it again. This is all we know about the internal investigation into Epstein's intelligence ties. This single footnote on page 169 of a 244-page report. When OPR asked Acosta about his apparent equivocation during his 2019 press conference in answering a media question about whether he had knowledge of Epstein being, quote, an intelligence asset, Acosta stated to OPR, the answer is no. Well, then how do you square that with the reporting that you said you backed off Epstein because you were told he belonged to intelligence? How do you belong to intelligence without being an intelligence asset? Because you're in this category. You're not an asset. There is no 201 file on you. You don't work for the CIA on a full-time basis. But you occasionally, when interests align, arrange for financing covertly for a project that the CIA wants done, but that the donors in Epstein's network also profit from. This is what happened in the case of Bruce Rappaport, Mark Rich, and a dozen others that we're going to go through over the course of the next few hours here. You guys following along with me? Now, I'll show you an example of what this looks like. Because as we're going to see, and I'm going to emphasize this point a few times, let me do a quick detour to show you what this looks like in CIA speak. Here's a declassified CIA secret memo from 1974, declassified in 2006. To the chief of the CIA's European division. Subject, groovy, European media assets. Austria. In Die Presse, it's an independent daily newspapers. Circulation 61,000. An influential, can you guys see this? Do I need to zoom in? An influential Austrian paper with Salzburger Nachrichten has significant readership outside Austria. What is our access to this newspaper? Okay, so this is a description of the newspaper, and here is our point of contact to instrumentalize the newspaper. So this is part of Operation GR Camera. I'm sorry, GR Camera is the cryptonym. Okay, this is a cryptonym. So the facilitator here has a cryptonym. Now, you can have a cryptonym if you're an asset. You can also have a cryptonym if you are a facilitator or liaison. But they're hiding his name. Editor-in-chief does not accept direct placements for stories. This is the CIA wanting to plant media stories in European media. He does not accept direct placements from the CIA on a routine basis, but is a witting, cooperative contact who will occasionally place a special story in response to our guidance or suggestion. So this guy probably does not have a 201 file. He's not an agent. He's not necessarily an asset. He is a cooperative contact usually not on the rolls as an asset. No control measures over him. Does not work for the CIA. But he speaks not infrequently with the CIA. As a witting, cooperative contact for the CIA who does not do everything the CIA says. He does not always print the story the CIA contact tells him to print, but will occasionally place a special story when we really urge him to, or it aligns with something that he wants printed anyway. Okay? This is what the relationship is with Epstein, as I'm trying to convey. When covert financing needs to be arranged with outside bankers, outside hedge funds, outside high net worth individuals, he is a witting, cooperative contact. This is how you have the same equivocation from Jeffrey Epstein that you have with Alex Acosta about it. Jeffrey Epstein bragged, I think in, what was it, the Sunday Tribune or something in the UK, that he worked for the CIA. And then they said years later he denied it. Well, because you're not working at the CIA. You're not even really working for the CIA. But in glib terms, as a witting, cooperative contact who occasionally arranges deals when the interests align, then you are simultaneously working with the CIA without working for the CIA. So they say, okay, here's another one. This one name redacted because there's no cryptonym. Editor for Military and European Security Affairs is a cooperative contact willing to place a story on occasion if it has a bearing on his areas of interest. So this is not an agent working full time. This is not an asset who's doing everything the CIA says. He will occasionally do what the CIA wants. He'll occasionally not do what the CIA wants. But the CIA has a line of communication who reaches out and says, listen, I think this will be good for both of us. Can you do this? And if Epstein, or in this case, redacted media guy, says, okay, this is actually on my area of interest, yeah, I'll place that story. Now, let's see how it looks like with other folks who are assets. Vienna, The Walken Press, an independent political, economic, cultural weekly that has wide readership in leading Austrian governmental, economic, and intellectual circles. What is our access at the CIA to Walken Press, this highly influential magazine, newspaper read by a lot of Austrian government officials? Well, our access is, name redacted, foreign news editor at that newspaper. Now, he was a salaried asset until late 1968, when he asked for a temporary suspension of contact with the CIA point of contact. But he was re-recruited as an asset 6 years later in 1974, and he has agreed to accept press placements appropriate to his area of responsibility. Do you see the distinction? One is simply a cooperative contact who, in the interests align, they work with the CIA. One is a salaried asset working for the CIA. This guy's going to have a 201 file. If you were to ask, if this guy were to get a sweetheart deal and Alex Acosta was asked under oath, is this an intelligence asset? You would have to say yes. This one, you can say no. Do you follow? But that's a salaried asset. Now let's go to this one. Newspaper in Vienna, Der Courier, independent daily, circulation 450,000, one of Austria's two largest mass circulation dailies, somewhat less sensational than its chief rival, Die Neue Kreuznachrichten. Access, name redacted, a witting, unsalaried asset. So you have a witting, so we now have three different categories of working with the CIA. We have a salaried asset who's got a 201 file, classified as an asset, and getting paid by the CIA to do it. Then you have an asset who's got a 201 file, but they're not getting money for it, who freelances there and has placed several stories at the request of the CIA station. He is essentially a reporter rather than a commentator and prefers placements with newsworthy value. But notice how they make the distinction. This guy's an asset we don't pay, but he's been vetted and there's a file on him. This guy's an asset we do pay. He's vetted, there's a file on him. This is just a contact, but he's helpful to us from time to time. And if you want to read more about this, like here, I'll just send you the link to the. Okay. It's an interesting document. You'll see, for example, cooperative contact. An editor with good potential. He's placed articles at the request. Our contact lapsed, but he's currently being recontacted. Okay. Now let's get back to Bruce Rappaport. So Bruce Rappaport is personal friends with the CIA director, just like Jeffrey Epstein. Bruce Rappaport is a Swiss businessman with ties to Israel who is a principal in the project. They add that Mr. McKay is also examining how Mr. Rappaport contained in about how information about Mr. Rappaport contained in Central Intelligence Agency files was not provided to some officials who had questions about him and had asked the CIA for information about him. For background, okay? The agencies, so let me just highlight this. So the CIA had files referencing Bruce Rappaport. But Bruce Rappaport was not an asset. He was a cooperative contact. He was a liaison. He was a facilitator to broker this deal, which helped the CIA and also helped Israel and also helped the private clients like Bechtel, the CIA-connected firm that would go on to become Halliburton, who was the construction agent on this. They needed a financial fixer in the form of Bruce Rappaport to arrange, to rally all of the different people in Jordan, in Israel, in Iraq, and in the U.S. to all agree to a deal that the U.S. government wanted to keep secret. So they turned to Bruce Rappaport, friend of the CIA director, but a Swiss guy who was working with Israel to broker this in the background. And when the CIA was asked for their files on Bruce Rappaport, they lied. They said, Bruce Rappaport, he's not an asset. They said, files, what do you want files for? He's not an intelligence asset. The answer is no. But they had lots of references to Bruce Rappaport because even though he wasn't an asset, he was the financial fixer for the deal. The agency's highly classified dossier on Mr. Rappaport raised questions about his business dealings and referred to him as a representative of Israel, officials say. But that information was not provided to another agency that made an official request through proper channels. So the CIA is saying in their own highly classified dossier on Bruce Rappaport, other U.S. government agencies, the FBI, the Justice Department, the U.S. military, the State Department, queried the CIA for their files on Bruce Rappaport, purported CIA asset, but the CIA says not an asset. Sorry, there's no file on him. But they didn't query the traffic, not the file, the cables, the analyst memos. That's where they were keeping it. And in those files, they referred to him as a representative of Israel. Because the chief purpose of this, now Bruce Rappaport was a financier, just like Jeffrey Epstein. He was the money guy, but he had close ties to the government of Israel. He knew the head of, he knew Shimon Peres, the prime minister. He knew the defense minister in Israel. And what the CIA wanted was guarantees from the Israeli government that they would not mess with a U.S.-Iraqi pipeline so close to Israel's sovereign territory. So they went through a financier with close ties to the Israeli government to arrange this deal. Does that sound familiar? Mr. Wallach and Mr. Rappaport were brought into the deal. So again, this guy is, Mr. Wallach is the personal friend of the Attorney General, the Bill Barr equivalent, the Pam Bondi equivalent, and Mr. Rappaport, the Swiss financier, brought into the deal, who also had close ties to Israel, were brought into the deal at least in part because of their ties to officials in Israel and the United States. American officials say Mr. Rappaport was closely aligned with Shimon Peres, then Israel's prime minister, while Mr. Wallach, who represented Mr. Rappaport, boasted of his ties to Mr. Meese, the Attorney General. Soon after these two men became active in the project, each obtained signs of support from both the U.S. Attorney General and the Prime Minister of Israel. The objections of other government agencies or officials to the pipeline project were overruled, ignored, or bypassed largely through efforts of the National Security Council. Okay? So the Department of Defense, the Department of State, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, they have said, hey, listen, what are you guys doing here? They're overruled by the National Security Council through the National Security Advisor, who's in charge of defense, diplomacy, and intelligence. Officials familiar with the project, all of whom asked not to be identified, said it gathered momentum in May 1985, the same month that National Security Council officials began pushing the idea of selling arms to Iran in Iran-Contra. They sold weapons to Iran to defend itself against Iraq, and then took the proceeds of the Iranian weapons sales to fund the Nicaraguan Contras at a time when there was a ban on U.S. aid to Nicaragua. So they had to reach into an outside financing network, selling weapons in one country, because they could not get U.S. aid money to fund it through the U.S. government because the Democrats objected to it. That was the Bolin Amendment. Now, and that itself was done the same way, as we'll get to in more examples on this. In the case of Iran-Contra, it was Adnan Khashoggi, a wealthy Saudi businessman, an arms dealer, who acted as the middleman between the U.S. and Israeli government for operations in Iran. Adnan Khashoggi was the Jeffrey Epstein of the Iran deal. Bruce Rappaport was the Jeffrey Epstein of the Iraq deal. The similarities between the Iran affair and the Iraqi pipeline deal are striking, several officials said. In both instances, Robert McFarlane, the then national security advisor, was drawn into a deal by a middleman with personal financial stakes. In addition, American support for the Iraqi project was handled outside normal government channels, and the small number of officials involved were instructed to keep it secret from their colleagues. This is why you run it through an outside network. This is why Bill Burns would be meeting with Jeffrey Epstein. This is why Bill Clinton would be meeting with Jeffrey Epstein. Not because Bill Clinton is on a client list getting a pipeline of 13-year-old girls from Jeffrey Epstein. How many times did Jeffrey Epstein visit the White House? At least 17 times. Not a phone call where that can be traced, where it might leak and you don't know who's listening. You do personal meetings like this because you have private business. Jeffrey Epstein visited the Clinton White House at least 17 times. Now, at the time, he had durable power of attorney over Les Wexner's entire financial empire, the largest retail chain in the entire country, Limited Brands was. What do you think they talked about 17 times? Jeffrey Epstein was credited with coming up with the idea for the Clinton Global Initiative. And in fact, the Clintons even acknowledged his role before his scandal. This was before the sex offending thing. Mr. Epstein was part of the original group that conceived the Clinton Global Initiative. What is the Clinton Global Initiative? It is bringing together pools of donors with huge amounts of money to give to a private foundation that also does philanthropic and humanitarian work, basically shadow covert action, relief programs, but to groups that the State Department wants nudged in a particular direction or wants logistical resupplies to. He's not visiting the White House to get Bill Clinton's girls, okay? As much as a sex pest as Bill Clinton was, he's doing it because they know that Epstein runs Wexner's money. They know that Epstein handles the personal finances of Edgar Bronfman. They know that he's connected to big money donors in Saudi Arabia and Monaco and Egypt, and that he's close friends with people in the Israeli government. That there's a money network that can be used, the Israeli government, the Saudi government, the French government, the UK government, friends with the royal family and the big dollars out of that, the French aristocracy. Let me get back to our New York Times article. Jeffrey Epstein is going to the White House 17 times because Bill Clinton wants these deals handled outside of normal government channels. The same way Reagan did, the same way George H.W. Bush did, the same way Bill Clinton did. Finally, both the Iran and Iraq deals raised questions about the influence of Israeli interests on American policy. This is in 1988 in the New York Times. A question that Mr. McKay is said to be exploring that is considered highly sensitive. This is New York Times in 1988. Until 1985, so this is why I'm trying to say this is a very complicated thing with Epstein. And there's a lot of nuance to the nature of the relationship. You have a U.S. covert action that requires joint activity with the nation of Israel, as well as Saudi, UK, France. We can get deeper into those connections. There's basically the evolution of the Safari Club and the foreign policy network around Iran after 1979. And then in later years, the Wexner Empire and beyond, and beyond. Okay, so again, finally, both the Iran and Iraq deals raised questions about the influence of Israeli interests on American policy, a question the special prosecutor is said to be exploring. Until 1985, the administration's approach was to seek an end to the hostilities in the region and to support neither in the protracted Iran-Iraq war, which raged from 1980 to 1988. Israel, on the other hand, was quietly encouraging continued conflict between Iran and Iraq, so that neither would emerge as a dominant regional power player. By the fall of 1985, after months of dealing with Israeli representatives, the administration's approach to the war in the Persian Gulf had shifted to a contradictory policy that appeared to some analysts to be tantamount to backing both sides at once. Israel apparently was doing much of the same. Even as the administration set in motion its first arms sales to Iran with the assistance of Israel through Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi middleman, its official justification for backing the pipeline was that increased sales of crude oil by Iraq would help Iraq finance the weapons they needed for the war against Iran. Okay? So the national security justification is this will give more money to Iraq, and Iran, which just broke free of the U.S. government control over it when the 1979 revolution happened, and the Shah was, the whole Shah regime was kicked out. So they're saying we want to help Iraq against Iran. At the same time, we're selling weapons to Iran to fund a separate war in Nicaragua. Both the arms sales are illegal because of the arms embargo to Iran, and the war in Nicaragua is illegal because of the Boland Amendment passed by Congress. That's why they work quietly, secretly, outside normal government channels, and why it has to be run through CIA. Because the arms sale to Iran is illegal under the arms embargo, so the State Department can't endorse it. And the war in Nicaragua is illegal because it's banned by Congress. And in the Iraq case, they don't want the State Department to admit that they are supporting Iraq in the Iraq-Iran conflict. That's why you tap an outside network of financiers and gun runners covertly through CIA liaisons, so that the thing happens by itself because of private actors that the U.S. government had nothing to do with, and it just so happened to advance what the National Security Council wanted. You guys following? The key actors included, let me know in the chat if you guys are following along, because I know there's a lot of moving parts here, but I think this is important. The key actors included Mr. Rappaport, who was born in Palestine before it became Israel. He later moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and became an international businessman reputed to have earned more than $1 billion, just like Jeffrey Epstein, through dealings in energy, shipping, and finance. One American official said Mr. Rappaport often boasted of his ties to the Israeli government, just like Jeffrey Epstein with Ehud Barak and Robert Maxwell. There were also rumors, which were persistent enough to have been the subject of questions by the special prosecutor, that Mr. Rappaport had ties with the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. So on the one hand, they're like, okay, this is a scandal-ridden pipeline, and it's being run by a guy with close ties to Mossad. But the CIA is greenlighting the project. The National Security Council wants that. Do you understand the complications? They're like, because this is what everyone's saying right now with Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, Alex Acosta, the prosecutor, said he belonged to the CIA. He bragged that he was part of the CIA. Oh, but look at Robert Maxwell. Look at Ehud Barak. Look at Les Wexner. Look at Edgar Bronfman. You can be both, right? In fact, you can be more than that. You can also include the Saudis, the British, and the French. Because he's not an agent. He's not even an asset. He was a dude who was recruited to Bear Stearns without a college degree when Ace Greenberg had an office philosophy of what they called PSD, poor, smart, driven to make money. And he was a risk-taking dude who was willing to be the front man and do daredevil financial shit that everybody else was afraid they'd lose their license or get prosecuted for doing. And made a market out of it. Donors threw their money behind him, first with the Bear Stearns Network, then later with Les Wexner. And so he came to have access to a network of donors that became useful to both the Central Intelligence Agency, the Israeli government, very likely the Saudis, the British, and the French as well. Safari Club, that whole network. It's an international web. They all have soft alliances, but just a little bit of discrepancy on certain foreign policy things. And so he is one of a pool of outside financiers who can be tapped to do discreet brokering of deals, which he juices with a high life of crazy parties, a wild island, hot girls, which helps bring people into these deals. And then he uses his Bear Stearns network to arrange the offshore financing for it. This is why everyone who I've talked to, who's met with Epstein personally, they all say that he doesn't know fuck all about currency trading or can recall with any specificity or interest the trade craft of complex debt instrument, back-to-back loans, and the intricacies of the offshore, because that's not what he is. He was the broker of the deals, and then the back end, the Bear Stearns folks, they'll handle the actual offshore structuring, and the money will come from the donor network, who's going to make money on the deal. It is a private, self-sustained, off-the-shelf, standalone enterprise. Just like Ollie North testified to Congress. Private, self-sustained, off-the-shelf, standalone network that can be tapped by the CIA to covertly arrange financing for a covert action when they don't want U.S. government fingerprints on the deal, but they want the deal to happen. Mr. Rappaport declined to be interviewed despite repeated requests by phone and telex. His attorney said he had a policy of not talking to reporters. Then there was E. Robert Wallach, a successful San Francisco personal injury lawyer who had been Mr. Mises' lawyer. Mr. Wallach cut an unusual figure in Washington. His sartorial trademark was a large carnation. He signed his name in all lowercase letters, like the poet E. E. Cummings. The project's roots go back to 1983, the year the National Endowment for Democracy was created as a private CIA at the NGO layer by William Casey, the CIA director, friend of Jeffrey Epstein, long before Mr. Wallach and Mr. Rappaport came on the scene. In that year, Iraq was faced with the shutdown of an oil pipeline by Syria and was exploring other routes to export its oil. Among the options were new pipelines in Turkey and Saudi Arabia and through Jordan at the port of the Gulf of Aqaba. The Bechtel Group showed an interest. Now, we went over in our JFK file streams Bechtel, one of the most closely guarded, secretive multinational companies in the world, deeply embedded in the CIA, the Defense Department, the Department of Energy. From the 1950s, Stephen Bechtel was already working hand in glove with the newly founded CIA. As a charter member of the San Francisco-based National Committee for a Free Asia, what did we say when we went over remember inauguration of the organized political warfare in 1948, setting up the committees, a liberation committee to covertly support freedom movements? We'll have ostensibly private citizens set up an overt group called the Liberation Committee for Eastern Europe, but it will receive covert guidance from the CIA. Well, Steve Bechtel, the head of Bechtel, literally set up that exact same thing the CIA called for in inauguration of organized political warfare by George Kennan in 1948 to run CIA-backed resistance movements in Asia, a covert action organization determined to roll back the dark forces of Soviet imperialism in Asia. The New York Times will later expose the committee as a front organization for the CIA. Yeah, 3 years before, the CIA literally called to set that up, which was but one of many deep and long-standing affiliations between Steve and the intelligence community he proudly embraced. He served as the CIA's liaison with the Business Council. Liaison. $10 from Bratislava. How does the Donald Barr relationship jive with this more organic Epstein origin? Because Bill Barr was the mop-up man for the CIA in Iran-Contra, Brad. Bill Barr was, look up Bill Barr. I mean, I can do it right here. I just don't want to keep opening new tabs. Bill Barr, mop-up man, Iran-Contra. He was the guy who blocked the Congress investigating CIA malfeasance during Iran-Contra. Back in 1992, the first time Bill Barr was U.S. Attorney General, iconic New York Times writer William Safire referred to him as cover-up General Barr because of his role in burying evidence in both Iraqgate and Iran-Contra. Christmas Day of 1992, the New York Times featured a screaming all-caps headline: Attorney General Bill Barr had covered up evidence of crimes by Reagan and Bush in the Iran-Contra scandal. And what did he do? Because Bill Barr started his career in the CIA. Let's just go to his Wikipedia real quick, and you'll see this. Bill Barr, not only did his father recruit Jeffrey Epstein to the Dalton School, but Bill Barr was personally involved in the very operation that Jeffrey Epstein got his start facilitating, the Adnan Khashoggi network in Iran-Contra. Bill Barr, whose father was in the CIA, Donald Barr, started his career in the CIA, told his high school guidance counselor his dream job was to be the head of the CIA. From 1971 to 1977, so for 6 years, Bill Barr was employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. And then what did he do after that? You'll see it in Iran-Contra. Hold on a sec. In late 92, independent counsel Lawrence Walsh, who had been chosen to investigate Iran-Contra, found documents in the possession of Reagan's former defense secretary, head of the DOD, Caspar Weinberger, which Walsh said was evidence of conspiracy among the highest-ranking Reagan admin officials to lie to Congress, the American public. Weinberger was set to stand trial on felony charges in 93, and then Barr pardoned Weinberger. And the other thing that he did is he blocked an investigation that the special prosecutor wanted to make into the CIA's role in Iran-Contra. Having come from the CIA, he becomes the legislative affairs guy, the blocker and tackler, to block Congress access to documents about what the CIA was doing. So Bill Barr was the firewall that protected the CIA and the DOD and the National Security Council from Justice Department investigations into just how deep the covert action went. And he's the attorney general when Jeffrey Epstein dies, as people are asking questions about how deep that went, the CIA activity went with Jeffrey Epstein. And he's the one that OPR directly reports to when OPR is asking questions to Alex Acosta about whether or not Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence. It's not enough to just get the Alex Acosta transcript. We need all files, records, text messages, emails around Bill Barr and his deputy Jeffrey Rosen and the OPR team. Because if this footnote is all we have, in answering a question about whether he had knowledge of Epstein being an intelligence asset, Acosta stated to OPR the answer is no. Why don't we have this transcript, despite the 348-page OPR report, verbatim quoting long emails, but for this, it's just a footnote, footnote 244? I believe part of the reason is that Bill Barr may have blocked that. OPR reported directly to Bill Barr. Bill Barr was involved in the exact same network as Jeffrey Epstein, the Iran-Contra network. The New York Times referred to him as the cover-up general for Iran-Contra. Jeffrey Epstein got his entire start through Iran-Contra. From Edgar Bronfman while he was at Bear Stearns to Adnan Khashoggi while he was out on his own from 1991 to 1997. Adnan Khashoggi was the guy who pitched the Iran-Contra deal to McFarlane, the National Security Advisor, to even do Iran-Contra. And he's Jeffrey Epstein's client. So the literal middleman of the scandal that Bill Barr covered up is a client. Bill Barr's just running the same cover up that was done that he got his professional start doing, first at the CIA and then as a lawyer protecting the CIA from Congress, and then finally burying the investigation when he was Attorney General the first time. So we need all of Barr's communications. And if it turns out that there was a technological glitch in November 2020 that wiped all of his communications the same way in 2008, all of the communications of Alex Acosta were wiped on the official justice.gov emails, then we didn't know that. But I want to know that Pam Bondi's looked for this. And let there at least be the headlines: Bill Barr's emails turn up missing, technological glitch, while there's an internal investigation as to whether or not Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence. And the OPR team is reporting to Bill Barr. Turns out Bill Barr's emails are now gone from that too. I don't know if that's true, but I don't think Justice Department has asked for it. Did Bill Barr lean on OPR to only ask one question that was the wrong question to ask? Did Bill Barr shape OPR's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein? We have a right to know that. Also, the CIA Office of General Counsel. I want to know all of her communications. I have her name right here. Courtney Simmons Elwood, CIA Office of General Counsel. Here's the chain of command for OPR at the time of the did Epstein belong to intelligence investigation. And I have the name of it was Jeffrey Ragsdale, who was in charge of OPR at the time. All communications between Jeffrey Ragsdale and Bill Barr about Epstein's intelligence ties. We have a right to know. All communications between Jeffrey Ragsdale and Jeffrey Rosen, Bill Barr's deputy. Jeffrey Rosen, you may remember, because Jeffrey Rosen is who led the secret team before January 6th. You guys remember this? Jeffrey Rosen, January 6th, secret team. Exclusive secret commandos with shoot-to-kill authority were at the Capitol. On January 3rd, 3 days before January 6th, Bill Barr's deputy, Jeffrey Rosen, who handled the day-to-day with OPR for the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, he became acting head of the Justice Department when Bill Barr resigned. But they ran a secret operation 3 days before January 6th. The heads of a half dozen elite government special operations teams met in Quantico. The subsequent deployment of these shadowy commandos on January 6th was never revealed until Newsweek did a year after. Right after January 1st, Jeffrey Rosen, then the acting attorney general on January 6th, approved implementation of contingency plans dealing with the most extreme possibilities. A terrorist attack involving a weapon of mass destruction. Oh, like a pipe bomb? And declaration of measures to implement continuity of government. Rosen made a unilateral decision to take the preparatory steps to deploy Justice Department so-called national forces. There was no formal request from the Capitol Police, the Secret Service, or the Metropolitan Police Department. He just had a hunch something was going to go down. Nobody asked for it, but Jeffrey Rosen just led it himself. The contingency units met on January 3rd in the FBI's Render Safe team, FBI SWAT team, special response teams from ATF, U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group. All of these assets were pre-deployed and ready to go. They trained at Quantico. The units were to move via helicopter to January 6th. Catastrophic response teams. Entailed an automatic green light allowing federal responders to take initiatives and spare no resources, including shoot to kill authority. That was Jeffrey Rosen, Bill Barr's deputy, when Acosta was interviewed about Epstein's intelligence ties. And that's who would be handling the day-to-day of the OPR investigation into Epstein. So you've got the guy who covered for the CIA's role in Iran-Contra. The subject that Jeffrey Ragsdale, the OPR reporter, is writing about was one of the financiers involved in Iran-Contra. Then he turns up dead, and there's a question, well, was he CIA? Because, Iran-Contra was CIA. All these other financial deals that align with U.S. national interest that involved outside financial fixing. Looks like this guy had intelligence connections. The guy we're interviewing, Alex Acosta, said that he belonged to intelligence. Now the public demands answers. Do you think Jeffrey Rosen and Bill Barr may have shaped what OPR put in the final report so that all we have to answer that question is a random footnote on page 169, footnote 244? We have a right to know Rosen's communications, Barr's communications with Ragsdale and his team about whether they shaped those questions or edited or had input into what came out in the final report. Because we don't have the transcript. We don't even know what question they asked. This is a one-line summary description. Was that really the only question? This was a major, major news story. This is part of why Alex Acosta had to step down from the Trump administration as the Secretary of Labor. This was the $1 million question that hung over Epstein for a year and a half. And you do a 348-page report about the plea deal, and what was reported in mainstream media was that the whole reason for the plea deal was that he belonged to intelligence, and you ask one question that you don't even have the specifics of how you framed it, and you have a part answer. Where's the damn transcript? What did you ask and what didn't you ask? Did you ask if Jeffrey Epstein had ever been a cooperative contact? Did you ask if you were ever told that Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence? Did you ask if anyone had flagged potential intelligence ties around Epstein before you cut the plea deal? If you did not, those questions need to be asked on the record now. Let's get back to this. Was Jeffrey Epstein a Bruce Rappaport figure in his 40 years as a high-profile outside financier who visited the Clinton White House 17 times, who helped set up the Clinton Global Initiative, who had access to the entire financial empire of the richest man in Ohio? What deals were done through the U.S. government, brokered through Jeffrey Epstein? Okay, let's get back to this. So again, Bechtel is a CIA company, but it's technically a private company. And they were going to build the pipeline that would help pump up the economy of Iraq so that it could be used against Iran. So the U.S. government was behind it, but they didn't want to admit it publicly. Bechtel wanted to make $1 billion constructing it. The problem is, how do we get Israel to agree to this deal? Someone has got to back channel this deal with Israel. Someone who is close to the Israeli government, someone who's close to the defense establishment in Israel, someone who's close to the senior leadership in Israel, someone who's, say, close to the prime minister of Israel, just like Bruce Rappaport was close with Shimon Peres, the former prime minister of Israel. Someone has to broker that deal. Covertly, quietly, secure commitments so that Bechtel can go ahead and build the pipeline and the U.S. government can say, oh, well, that's convenient. Israel is, they're building this pipeline and we didn't talk about it with Israel. It's just a private transaction. If the international community has a problem with it, or if Turkey has a problem with it, Turkey, don't get mad at us. This is just a private transaction. What did you want us to do? Interfere with free trade? No, it's done covertly through this back channel. But they need to get the back channel assurances. So they turned to a banker with a lot of money and a fuzzy background, involved in a lot of scandals before that, but he had close access with the government of Israel, and he had a close history of working with the Central Intelligence Agency. He was best friends with the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. The prospect of building the huge pipelines attracted the Bechtel Group, the giant engineering services company that had done considerable business in the Middle East. By 1984, Bechtel obtained a preliminary financing commitment from the Export-Import Bank, a government agency. Now, the Export-Import Bank is a frequent CIA money channel. I won't get into the minutia of that, but just something to keep in mind. You have a CIA covert action to facilitate the deal and get it brokered. You have a CIA contractor, Bechtel, and you have a CIA government agency financing source here. Bechtel immediately realized that the main hurdle facing the pipeline project would be insurance. Iraq and Jordan, through which the pipelines would pass, were demanding guarantees before they signed the deal with Bechtel that the interest payments would be met if Israel or anyone else attacked and destroyed the pipeline. And think about this, from the national security perspective, they said, well, listen, Iraq has all this oil. The pipeline that they were using just got impeded. So if we don't service Iraq's oil, Russia might. The Soviet Union might get Iraq's oil. It's a national security imperative that we do everything we can as the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Council, the Central Intelligence Agency, to make sure Bechtel gets that oil so that the Soviets don't get it. But we got to do this deal on the low. We need to use a Bruce Rappaport, a Jeffrey Epstein, a Bruce Rappaport. That request prompted Bechtel to explore the idea of insurance with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, a U.S. government agency that insures projects against political risks. Do you guys know what the Overseas Private Investment Corporation is today? So this is, we've talked about this. We talked about this in the last stream. So Bechtel wants to go to another U.S. government agency. It's called corporation, but that's just because it's making money on it for the U.S. Treasury. These are contracts, essentially, rather than grants. But it does business dealings to smooth the way for U.S. businesses operating in foreign markets. by cutting them, loans and insurance. Now, you know who the head of, so the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, you know what it is today? Here's a funny story. It's founded in 1971. In 2019, under Trump, it was dissolved and turned into the DFC, the United States International Development Finance Corporation. So it's not the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. It is USAID, but for financing contracts rather than grants. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. This is USAID, but for financing through loans and insurance. Okay, $20 from Jal Tory. Thank you, sir. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation was the United States government's development finance institution until it merged with a wing of USAID to form DFC, the Development Finance Corporation. Again, a U.S. government agency. Mobilize private capital to help solve critical development challenges, and in doing so, advance the foreign policy of the United States. So this is a government agency that mobilizes private capital, so it gets together outside investors to help smooth the business dealings for U.S. companies to make inroads in foreign markets. Do you know who is currently running the DFC? The son of Jeffrey Epstein's largest client. Ben Black, because this is why I'm calling this Jeffrey Epstein and USAID Part 2. Why am I connecting USAID? Because you need to understand this structure to understand how to reform the USAID function. Ben Black is the son of Leon Black. Leon Black paid Jeffrey Epstein $158 million. I think it was $170 million in total. He's the head of Apollo, the Apollo Investment Fund, one of the largest funds on Wall Street. Okay? And that was in, I think, 2012, 2013, 2014, after Epstein had already been convicted as a sex offender. So we're back to the Epstein network. The son of Jeffrey Epstein's largest paying client in 2014 is running the same place that during Iran-Contra, during the Iraq-gate, Bechtel went to first before they went to the Jeffrey Epstein equivalent, Bruce Rappaport. You following me? Guess what? Ain't shit changed since the 80s. This is the structure we always use. Ever since the CIA reforms of the 1970s, this is how CIA work gets done. We are trying to change that today with the reforms to USAID. We're trying to change that today with attempts at ODNI to try to put more handcuffs on the intel agencies so they don't go rogue. But it's a relevant question. It's literally the exact same players. Not just the same playbook. It's the same players running the same playbook. So Bechtel goes to what today is DFC, run by Jeffrey Epstein's, the son of Jeffrey Epstein's largest client, under the Trump administration. Leon Black, Ben Black's dad, Ben Black running DFC. Leon Black was also a donor to Trump and a VIP at the inauguration and a big-time Trump guy. This is part of what when you hear Trump say, we don't want to release stuff because, it's going to ruin people's reputations, even though they didn't engage in child sex trafficking. But everyone's going to think, if you release these Epstein files and you see like Leon Black's name there, that it's going to be, that they're going to think that Leon Black was trafficking in underage kids or whatever. I don't believe that to be the case. And I think Trump is right about that because people misunderstand the function that Epstein served. Girls' juice deals. Did he pawn off girls on the people he was doing deals with? Bet your ass he did. But that's a different thing than, blackmail. That's a different thing than like the CIA and Mossad collecting the tapes of the people having sex with those girls in order to blackmail them. Like the CIA, Israeli intelligence, Saudi intelligence, French intelligence, British intelligence likely wanted those deals done and looked the other way about how Epstein juiced those deals. Bechtel officials concluded they would need to make contact with the Israeli government. And so in February of 1985, they reached a tentative agreement to form a partnership with Mr. Rappaport. So this is a private client forming a partnership with Rappaport. Tom Flynn, a spokesman with Bechtel, said Mr. Rappaport had been referred by Japanese business interests, adding, "We were led to believe he had some experience in Israel. He could get a U.S. company being backed by the CIA and the National Security Council to do this deal." And so they back-channeled it through an outside financier with close ties to Israel to make contact with the Israeli government, prime minister level, defense minister level, to secure their secret agreement to greenlight the Bechtel pipeline. Within 2 weeks, Mr. Rappaport delivered. Mr. Flynn, the representative for Bechtel, said that Mr. Rappaport produced a letter from Shimon Peres, who was then the Israeli prime minister, that promised Israel would not interfere with the pipeline. This is the Balfour Declaration. This is the Bechtel Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was the secret letter from Lord Balfour to Lord Rothschild. We promise you will have the mandate of Palestine in 1917. Well, this is the reverse of that. This is the reverse Balfour letter. This is the Bechtel letter, the Bechtel Declaration. This is the Israeli government saying to Bechtel, we promise that you will receive your pipeline. A secret letter. But what did Israel get for it? This became the crux of the special prosecutor investigation into Ronald Reagan's Attorney General. That was the signal, Rappaport's way of showing our folks he could be useful. But the letter from Mr. Peres was not sufficient to assuage Iraqi fears. Baghdad wanted something more tangible, namely money. So Rappaport has got a tough job here. He's got to manage pressure from the CIA and the National Security Council. He's got to manage pressure from his corporate client Bechtel. He's got to manage the security and economic concerns of Israel, and he's got to manage the security and economic concerns of Iraq. He has to be a highly connected individual who's able to schmooze with all of them and get them all to agree to a deal. Meanwhile, officials at the overseas, what today is the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, were unenthusiastic about the deal, in part because they saw no evidence of backing at the top levels of the administration. Although some at the State Department supported the deal, George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State, the State Department, and the former Vice Chairman of Bechtel, just like Rex Tillerson went from head of Exxon Mobil to Secretary of State, was notably silent. Mr. Shultz had removed himself from any involvement. Part of this is because of the secrecy. Because this was not technically blessed by the U.S. government, it was a covert action, arranging covert financing, kept in-house at CIA and NSC. The development finance arm of the government said, well, listen, the State Department's silent on this, so they probably don't support it. So they weren't able to get financing from the U.S. government. They had to go to the outside financiers, like the Epstein equivalent here, Bruce Rappaport. We've got a Swiss guy with a bizarre scheme. In May of 1985, an Overseas Investment Development Corporation official told an attorney for Mr. Rappaport that he wanted some evidence of senior government support. The official said he told Mr. Rappaport's lawyers, "We got a Swiss guy here with a bizarre scheme. I haven't heard from anybody in the government that we should be doing something like this, building the pipeline." When Mr. Wallach got involved in the project soon afterwards, however, the question was answered. According to one source in the deal, Mr. Wallach was brought in because of his ties to Mr. Meese, not for his legal talent. Like Mr. Rappaport, Mr. Wallach quickly delivered. With the help of a phone call by Mr. Meese, the Attorney General of the United States, the Bill Barr equivalent, Mr. Wallach arranged a meeting with the National Security Advisor, the head of the White House National Security Council. The session took place in the White House in June. Present were the head of the National Security Council, the financial fixer, and the guy who made sure it was all kosher at the Justice Department, Mr. Wallach. 3 days later, McFarland, the National Security Advisor, convened a White House meeting with top officials from the Overseas Investment Corporation and told them the project was a matter of national security interest. That's why you didn't hear anything from the State Department, because this was a covert action, a secret deal whose finances had to be on the low, but it's a matter of national security concern. It's all classified. The Insurance Corporation is one of Washington's more obscure agencies and normally deals with the State Department. Do you understand, by the way, the complications with USAID reform? DFC is going to be inheriting a big chunk of USAID's portfolio. Officials there viewed the involvement of the National Security Council as highly unusual and impressive. Sometime later, Mr. Rappaport held a small party honoring William Casey, the CIA director, at the luxurious Four Ways Washington restaurant. So the Swiss banker with close ties to the government of Israel, held a party honoring the then CIA director, William Casey. The evening was apparently part of an effort to persuade officials that the deal had high-level support. The guests included officials involved in the deal from Bechtel. And conversations centered around the pipeline and Mr. Rappaport's open display of his ties to the CIA director, said one guest. Officials said the Overseas Investment Corporation's questions about the deal were numerous, including the amount of insurance required, which was nearly $400 million in insurance, the lack of diplomatic agreements on insurance, and the unusual demands being made by Iraq. But officials said those concerns were eased by the insistence of the National Security Council and the apparent endorsement of the CIA director, William Casey. At some point, even though President Reagan gave his support to it, though it's not precisely known when. Even the president greenlit it. Again, Epstein met with President Bill Clinton 17 times. Questions are raised about Rappaport. By midsummer, however, the Overseas Investment Corporation, the insurer, the government insurer, became more concerned about the background of Mr. Rappaport. The agency's interest was piqued when a major financial institution involved in the deal said it would not work with Mr. Rappaport. This guy is scandalous, just like Jeffrey Epstein, financial fixer in the news now. So the DFC equivalent, who's getting pressured by the CIA to financially back this deal, says, hey, the guy brokering this deal has a really squirrely background, like Jeffrey Epstein. That prompted one agency official to take his concerns about Mr. Rappaport to a National Security Council official, who replied that the White House was vouching for Mr. Rappaport. Still not convinced, the insurer asked the CIA to give them a background report on Rappaport. They said, hey, CIA, what do you know about this guy who's brokering this deal that you guys are pushing? Because you're asking us to put up the money, and he seems fishy as fug. So the CIA does a limited hangout. They respond by sending a 2-page report, classified as secret, that contained information almost entirely available from newspaper clippings. Stuff that looks like this. What did we cover right here? Newspaper clippings, classified as secret, Yeah, this is what we have. We collected some newspaper clippings about the guy. But we left out all of our internal information about him because we don't want him to look like our guy to you. They did a limited hangout. They said, what do we got? Yeah, thought it was interesting. So we have these public newspaper clippings that here's our secret documents. Or public filings about his successful suit in the 1970s to recover money from the state-owned oil company of Indonesia. It disclosed little about Mr. Rappaport. Unbeknownst to officials of the government agency, again, this is a government request to the CIA, and the CIA misleads them because they don't want them to know how deep the roots go between the CIA and Bruce Rappaport. Stop me if that sounds familiar. Jeffrey Epstein. Unbeknownst to officials of the government agency insurer putting up the money, the CIA knew more about Mr. Rappaport. Mr. McKay, the special prosecutor, this is what our special prosecutor, if one gets assigned to Epstein, has to pursue, because you're not going to get this without one. The CIA will give you the runaround. You want our files on it? Yeah, when he was arrested in 2006, we collected some newspaper clippings. Doesn't mean he was working with us, though. Mr. McKay obtained a CIA document about Mr. Rappaport that's put together in connection with the National Security Council's efforts on behalf of the project. One official familiar with its contents said it included information about questionable business dealings by Mr. Rappaport, just like Jeffrey Epstein's questionable business dealings, which also included the largest Ponzi scheme in the country's history, the collapse of Towers Financial with Jeffrey Epstein in the 1980s, which Epstein magically skated free from. But his business partner spent 25 years in jail over it. Look up the Towers Financial bust that Epstein was cut in on because of an attorney general, the same way Bruce Rappaport was, John Mitchell. Let me show you this. Towers Financial the largest Ponzi scheme collapse before Bernie Madoff. This is in 1989. He was introduced to Stephen Hoffenberg, his business partner at Towers Financial, by John Mitchell. Who was John Mitchell? The Attorney General for Richard Nixon, who ended up going to jail over Watergate, because John Mitchell, just like what Ed Meese, the Attorney General for Ronald Reagan, was accused of being in on the deals while he was at Justice. John Mitchell was the Attorney General, the Pam Bondi, Bill Barr, Ed Meese equivalent, but for Richard Nixon during his first term. Then he became chair of the committee to re-elect the president, so he stepped down as AG, and he directed the Political Intelligence Fund behind Watergate, hiring all the ex-CIA plumbers of Watergate using the secret Political Intelligence Fund out of the campaign funds. He was then convicted in Watergate, but he's the one behind funding. He's the corrupt attorney general who funded the ex-CIA plumbers, and then he goes on to be a deal broker connecting Jeffrey Epstein to his business partner, Steve Hoffenberger, for the Towers Financial collapse. So you have this web of corrupt attorney generals, Bill Barr, John Mitchell, unclear with Ed Meese what his role was in this, but this is it's at the highest levels of the Justice Department. Jeffrey Epstein was connected, sandwiched by attorney generals, John Mitchell, Bill Barr. And also, so the secret memo that the CIA did not hand over when asked for files on Bruce Rappaport, the Jeffrey Epstein figure here, said included information about questionable business dealings by Mr. Rappaport, which would have confirmed the DFC's questions about the questionable business dealings, and also cited the role he had played in representing Israeli interests. Though that information caused concern among some participants in the deal, it was never passed on to McFarland or the Overseas Investment Corporation. So they hid that information. The CIA did. Throughout the summer, Mr. Rappaport and Mr. Wallach continued to maintain that the Israelis were enthusiastic supporters of the project. American officials insist that Israel was willing to pledge either American foreign aid money, U.S. aid money, or Israeli government money as insurance that it would not attack the pipeline. They believe that Israel was motivated by the promise of a share in the oil. They said the terminal in the Gulf of Aqaba would be controlled by Mr. Rappaport, who had touted himself as Israel's man in the deal. So once again, you see U.S. aid as money for a CIA operation. Another possible reason for Israel's acquiescence, this is in the New York Times, 1988. Another possible reason for Israel's acquiescence was Mr. Perez's, the Prime Minister of Israel's, interest in promoting a Middle East peace agreement with King Hussein of Jordan and a desire to send a strong signal to Jordan of Israel's goodwill. Later, in fact, Mr. Perez began to promote the idea of a Middle East Marshall Plan by which all countries in the region would be added economically. And you're going to see this again in the Jeffrey Epstein story. You're going to see this again with U.S.-Israel economic integration zones where Les Wexner financial assets, like massed industries, were helping to do economic, these deals where you had, we'll go over examples of this. Oh my gosh, we're at 2 hours and 45 minutes. In the 1990s, you had the same economic integration plan in developing countries in Africa to get sweetheart deals and exporting goods duty-free to the U.S. as long as they had like 11% qualifying Israel touch point in the supply chain. So the U.S. wanted to bring them into U.S. economic cooperation, wanted to make sure Israel got its cut on the deal because of the Israeli presence politically in the countries. And you had Les Wexner Enterprises under Jeffrey Epstein's durable power of attorney as the authorized signatory, who were setting up the businesses to qualify for that. Were any of those juiced the same way this was? We'll get to that if we have time. I can't believe we're already at 2 hours and 45 minutes. I feel like I want to get to 10 examples, and we're like halfway through example 1. Another possible explanation for the Israeli support is contained in a memo that Mr. Wallach presented to Mr. Meese. It said that part of the plan for the pipeline project included payments to the Israeli Labor Party, headed by Mr. Perez. Spokesmen for the Israeli government, which Perez is now foreign minister, have denied that any such payment was accepted or offered. So now you're getting to the kind of split between the different factions within the Israeli political system. For example, the Likud party is at war with the Ehud Barak faction. This is why Netanyahu has used the Epstein touch points to Ehud Barak as a talking point weapon, showing that Ehud Barak was corrupt because he was working with Jeffrey Epstein, that he had such close ties to Jeffrey Epstein. He was also the leader of the Israeli Labor Party. Ehud Barak, who met dozens of times with Epstein, just the financier with a checkered past who acted as the broker for U.S., Israeli, and Middle East covert deals, was even meeting with the exact same side of the Israeli government that Jeffrey Epstein was. understand to do these deals, you need inroads not just with the government, but with the side of the government who's relevant to the approval process. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, do you understand what I'm saying? There are political factions within a government, and you might need a guy to strike a deal with one faction that's the particularly important one there. But what I'm saying is, like with Bruce Rappaport, it was the same structure, the same outside financing, the same checkered past, and the inroads was with the Labor Party, which is in opposition, quite violent opposition, with the current Netanyahu government. By October 1985, it's clear the project was running into problems. Iraqi officials told a visiting American delegation that they had serious reservations about the plan. When an official from the U.S. government insurer for the deal confronted the National Security Council with the negative reports emanating out of Baghdad, Iraq, he was told, national security is our business. You mind yours. Put up the money and then shut the F up. That's what the National Security Council, running the covert operation, told the other side of the government who's supposed to front the money. Because they don't want them to know the details of what's being brokered. They just want them to put up the money and shut up. Mr. Wallach, meantime, had traveled to Israel to meet with Mr. Perez. He told an associate that Mr. Meese had authorized the trip. Again, Shimon Peres, the Israeli prime minister, also wrote a letter to Mr. Meese indicating that Israel backed the project. So Mr. Rappaport did well. Remember, when was Ehud Barak president? At the same time Bill Clinton was. Bill Clinton was in office from January 1991 to January 2001. And he is so tight with Jeffrey Epstein that they are meeting dozens of times. Were any deals that Jeffrey Epstein met with Bill Clinton about 17 times in the White House between Bill Clinton's American government and Ehud Barak's Israel government brokered by Jeffrey Epstein in the same way that Bruce Rappaport served as the go-between between U.S. and Israel on sensitive international deals during the Ronald Reagan administration. I think we have a right to know. That would explain Epstein belonging to intelligence without being a formal asset, because there was no 201 file on Bruce Rappaport, despite doing all this back and forth legwork for the CIA, with the CIA. He was not a CIA asset. He was getting commission fees from Bechtel and doing favors for his donors. Didn't need to do this. Did it because it aligned with his own interests and that of his network. The issue of Israel's role in the project and the insurer's objections became critical and came to a head in October. The agency's general counsel, Ralph Shanks, sent a memo to Mr. Meese that sought a legal opinion on several questions about the assignment of Israeli aid to secure the proposal. That's U.S. aid to Israel. So once again, the U.S. aid. This is all connected. That document was a classic example of Washington gamesmanship, according to officials who saw it. We were trying to abort the deal, one official recalled. Going to the Justice Department was part of that strategy. So this thing is so problematic and so secret that the agency being told to put up the money runs to the Justice Department and says, hey, Justice Department, the CIA is up to some really shady shit here. The National Security Council is telling us to just put up the money and don't ask any more questions. What's going on with this deal? Supporters of but the Justice Department was being run by a guy who was in on the deal. Allegedly. A guy whose friend was making money off the deal. That's why Ed Meese got in trouble, the Attorney General, for this. Supporters of the project, including Mr. Wallach, steered the memo around the normal channels so that Mr. Meese quickly received an opinion from a Justice Department lawyer whom Mr. Wallach had helped hire that suggested ways in which the legal obstacles could be surmounted so that they could still do the deal. Mr. Meese, this is why I ask, what did the CIA Office of General Counsel say? All communications from CIA OGC, the Office of General Counsel, all communications they had around Jeffrey Epstein at Justice Department need to be recovered, reviewed, and then made public to the American people by Pam Bondi. Do you think Pam Bondi's team knows this, though? Probably not. Because, again, MAGA just doesn't understand this stuff. It's a domestic movement that's concerned mostly with our problems here. They don't understand the structure they've inherited. So they don't know where to look in investigations like this. Supporters of the project, and if there's nothing there, then you should be able to just publish it all, like Odie and I did with JFK Files, and let us see what you saw. Mr. Meese, who was already playing a highly unusual role in foreign affairs since he was also Attorney General, supported these maneuverings. But opponents of the project, including the head of the DFC putting up the money, who had previously worked in the same justice office, forced the memo into official channels, where it received a totally negative opinion from department lawyers. Such a financing plan was not legally possible, they concluded, probably because of the shadiness of Bruce Rappaport, just like the shadiness with Jeffrey Epstein, which is another reason why Bill Barr might not want to concede Epstein's intelligence ties. Because if there were previous intelligence work that ran through Jeffrey Epstein at all, even for a small deal, if that comes up, that could be egg on Bill Barr. The deal, however, was not yet dead. Reagan administration officials continued until the end of 1985 to try to come up with creative solutions to the insurance problem because DFC was being uncooperative. But Mr. McFarlane resigned from his post as National Security Advisor in early December. Then Admiral Poindexter, who had approved the arms sale to Iran and Iran-Contra, listened to what Mr. Clark, the former security advisor, had to say and shut down the project. Mies Imbroglio, a pipeline project. So again, 1982, here's the pipeline. Syria, an ally of Iran, shuts down the Iraqi oil pipeline that carried Iraqi oil to the Mediterranean. 1983, discussions about $1 billion pipeline that would lead from Iraq through Jordan. 1984, Bechtel holds discussions with Iraqi and Jordanian officials about the proposal. Mid-1984, the two countries impose an additional security requirement involving guarantees that Israel won't sabotage the pipeline. Bechtel officials discuss the project with two different government agencies who can provide financing. 1985, Bechtel brings in the Jeffrey Epstein fixer, Bruce Rappaport, a Swiss business executive, as a partner. Rappaport retains Robert Wallach. Wallach and Rappaport produced support for the project from Attorney General Ed Meese and Prime Minister of Israel, Shimon Peres. NSC endorses the project. Bechtel submits a new proposal to Iraq and Jordan. So then the insurer sought a ruling from the Justice Department on the legality of assigning Israeli aid from the U.S. as part of the pipeline's package. There's a lot of aid that goes to Israel from the U.S. government. Is it possible that Jeffrey Epstein, running the Les Wexner empire, the financial empire, multi-billion-dollar empire, that something like this could have been happening in the background of diplomacy? Jeffrey Epstein handled the family finances for Edgar Bronfman at Bear Stearns. Edgar Bronfman was the chairman of the World Jewish Congress and converted the World Jewish Congress from basically a domestic issues focused Congress to what came to be called the foreign ministry of the global Jewish population, because it exerted such a strong pull on state departments and ministries of foreign affairs. And Jeffrey Epstein handled the family finances for them. So how much of the aid story ran through Epstein between the Reagan administration, the George Bush Sr. administration, the Clinton administration? And it might not be much, by the way. It might be one random deal in Mozambique. But I think there's a firewall. I don't think the answer is zero. And I think that there's a firewall being constructed at CIA to not even open the door about all these other touch points, whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia or the UK or the French, or activities that they don't want declassified. Because now you go back in history and you say, oh my God, this pipeline that's still around, this was covertly financed through outside financiers by the CIA, and this pipeline is sitting right here in Jordan. This economic zone is right here in Kenya, and this was arranged by Jeffrey Epstein. We don't want to give an excuse to the president of Egypt to scuttle this by corrupting it, because now there's an international scandal because it had CIA touch points, because we had to dig up the Epstein documents. You can see why this was relegated to a single footnote on page 169, trying to say, oh, not an asset. And no internal investigation, no files from the CIA Office of General Counsel, no transcript of what was actually asked and what was actually said. By the end of the year, the Jordanians and Iraqis reject Bechtel's proposal, and the National Security Council abandoned alternative ways of pledging Israeli funds to the project. So what happens 2 months after that New York Times article? Bruce Rappaport lashes out at Wallach, says his twisted account of pipeline deal spurred the inquiry. $30 from Marsh D142. You're doing great. But we did not get to we're at 3 hours right now. I have all of these, all of these case studies of all these people who were confirmed not assets, just who did the exact same thing that Jeffrey Epstein would have been doing. Now, listen, let me again confirm that this is speculation. I don't know this for a fact. I am left in the dark because nobody has answered this question. How do you square Acosta's statements in 2016 and 2019 about belonging to intelligence with the OPR report saying he had no knowledge of being an intelligence asset? There's one way to square it, and it accounts for all of these data points. And you'll notice, by the way, did you see this, Naftali Bennett? I thought it was very interesting when I saw Naftali Bennett's statements on this. As former Prime Minister of Israel, with the Mossad having reported directly to me, I can say with 100% certainty, the accusation that Jeffrey Epstein somehow worked for Israel or the Mossad running a blackmail ring is categorically and totally false. Yeah, that's probably true. But notice how it's limited to saying that he was running a blackmail ring. The sentence does not end here. It's this part, which just like with this, leads you to think, okay, oh, you mean he never worked with the government of Israel? No. He's saying he never worked with Israel running a blackmail ring. Just like, okay, yeah, I said he belonged to intelligence, but I have no knowledge of him being an intelligence asset. So you're like, okay, so he's not an intelligence asset, so he never worked with U.S. intelligence. That's what they want you to fill in the blank saying in your head. Because you can work with intelligence without being an intelligence asset. You can work with Israel or Israeli intelligence without running a blackmail ring. You just do what Bruce Rappaport did. You just do what Mark Rich did. You just do what Adnan Khashoggi did. You just did what Christopher Dragul did. You just do what Gustavo Alfaro did. You just do what James Giffen did. You just do what Aga Abedi did. It's a friggin' playbook. It's like there's dozens of these people. It's an outside roster. So 2 months after this New York Times article comes out, Bruce Rappaport, our Jeffrey Epstein type figure here, responds. Swiss financier Bruce Rappaport, lashing out as one-time associate in the Iraqi pipeline project, is now at the center of an investigation of Attorney General Ed Meese. Says the most serious allegations in the inquiry have resulted from a twisted account of the affair put forth by Robert Wallach, the friend of Meese. Bruce Rappaport says, Wallach, you set me up as a fall guy, but you twisted the account of what happened. Rappaport, in his first public denunciation of Wallach, denied that any pipeline proceeds were going to the Israeli Labor Party, Ehud Barak's party, but at that time it was Shimon Peres, a proposal cited in a 1985 memo from Wallach to Meese as the primary focus of the independent counsel, the special prosecutor. Instead, Rappaport said, under a secret arrangement, Israel itself would have been made a one-third partner in the venture, receiving $65 to $70 million a year in oil or cash. Do you get it now? Why this is secret? This was a secret agreement, back-channel negotiated by Bruce Rappaport on behalf of the CIA and Bechtel, where Shimon Peres, the prime minister, sends a letter to the United States saying, I approve this project. And then on the U.S. side, they go, why did Israel approve this project? Why is it in their interest to approve this project? I don't believe this letter. They're not getting anything out of the deal, despite being cut out of it. And so Wallach doesn't know what Bruce Rappaport actually agreed to with Shimon Peres. Just like nobody knows what was actually agreed to between Ehud Barak and Epstein when they met dozens and dozens of times and Ehud Barak was sleeping at Jeffrey Epstein's house. So they were left to speculate. Well, maybe it was bribes. Maybe it was a payoff to the political party. Maybe they were redirecting U.S. aid money. But then once Bruce Rappaport gets in trouble and he's like, all right, fine. You put a gun to my head. You want to know what really happened? How did I really get the prime minister of Israel to agree to the deal? You really want to know if you're going to try to throw me under the bus? Here's what's up, big guy. We had a secret agreement where actually Israel would draw a lifetime one-third profit from the entire pipeline running from Iraq through Jordan. Okay? We were secretly in on it, and this thing could have a 100-year lifeline. And it wasn't a one-time payment, to the Israeli Labor Party to buy me off on the deal. This was actually in Israeli national interest because we were a secret partner under the secret agreement that only Bruce Rappaport was privy to. How many times did that happen, for example, in any U.S. foreign policy decisions between Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak? Israel gives its blessing, saying it's doing one thing. Actually, the deal is quite different because of a secret agreement back-channel with Jeffrey Epstein. How many times did that happen subsequent to Ehud Barak's prime ministership when he was still playing a senior role in Israeli politics? We don't know because the CIA is keeping a tight lid and nobody's asking them. When Pam Bondi was asked the wrong question, again, the exact question that was asked of Pam Bondi at that press conference last week with Donald Trump, when Donald Trump interrupted her and said, you don't need to answer that. She was asked, do you know if Jeffrey Epstein's an intelligence asset? Wrong question. Had he worked in any capacity, formal or informal, with U.S. intelligence services? On any trades, transactions, deals, brokerages? John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, was sitting right next to her at the cabinet meeting. He didn't say anything. Did he look? Would he even know where to look? Unangan 22 for 20. What are the top points you would have liked to have talked about tonight that we didn't get to? What is the connection to Bondi to Bill Barr? Well, I mean, Pam Bondi was the Attorney General of Florida. I mean, we talked about that last week. I think they're very, very different. Very, very different. I mean, Bill Barr was born an operator. Pam Bondi is completely different life path, completely different experience, completely different beast. Remember, Bill Barr had already been Attorney General before in the 1990s under George H.W. Bush, before he became Attorney General again. I think Pam Bondi is just very green on the job and has to learn things very quickly. And that's a tough thing. Would you want to be Pam Bondi? That's a hard job. Listen, I don't envy Pam Bondi here. I'm not mad at Pam Bondi over here. She's got a million things to juggle, and this is not even like particularly relevant to the primary job of federal law enforcement. Jeffrey Epstein died 6 years ago. It's easy to not do if you don't know what you're looking for, or if there's donor sensitivities or national security sensitivities, so the agencies don't want to be cooperative. That's why you need to know what to look for, which means you need to know what you're even looking at. You're not going to find, a CIA analyst memo, with blackmail agreements. I don't think that's really, like I said, the statement that DOJ got in so much trouble for, the leaked Axios thing, that kicked this whole recent Epstein kerfuffle back off. That's probably true. There probably was not a written list of financial transactions using these girls for prostitution. I'm not even convinced that there was some prostitution element. I think it's like the same thing, girls juice deals, that he pawned the girls off on his friends and his potential business partners so that they associated doing business with Jeffrey Epstein with getting a currency that you can't buy. Beautiful young women. So you want to do deals with Epstein. If you're if you're a 65-year-old minister of defense from Jordan, when you see Epstein talk about the deal, you're probably getting lucky. Okay, let's keep going here. LA Times. So this is one of the reasons you have to keep it so secret. Let's just say, for example, the Development Finance Corporation, then OPIC, if the National Security Council had been totally honest about that with DFC. What if someone from DFC leaked it? And then the whole international community now knows that this pipeline, which is supposed to be to help the Arab world's economic development, actually Israel's getting 33% of the annual profits. That could totally jeopardize the Arab-Israeli relationships. So one part of our government is not telling another part of our government about what deal the Jeffrey Epstein figure even struck with the Israeli government. So here you'll see, because there was so much secrecy about the deal that the back channel actually struck with Israel, and it was so compartmentalized within the U.S. government, Bruce Rappaport says he assumed that because Perez is labor, Shimon Peres, the Israeli PM, is from the Labor Party, and because I told him that I would love to do something for Israel, Wallach jumped to the wrong conclusion that the money or oil would go to the Labor Party. But how can oil go to the Labor Party? How could $60 million go to the Labor Party? With all due respect, Israel is not a banana republic. You talk to any leader of the party in Israel and you talk about bribes, you'll get thrown out the window. He's saying this got reported as a bribe, but it was actually a secret agreement for the country to get a basically, annuity payment annually through its 1/3 interest in the deal. But the terms of the deal had to get hush-hush. Hence all these... Okay, you don't want me to beat it to death. Okay. We got 30 minutes left. Let me triage, because we only got to one of the 10 people I want to go over tonight. So give me a second here. Listen to the dulcet tones. I kind of want to do the Robert Mayhew, even though it's sort of like against the main point. The Robert Mayhew story is really interesting because it has to do with the CIA and organized crime in a genuine case of sexual blackmail. So that I can do a counterpoint to my own argument, so you can sort of see so you can make up your own mind about what I believe the case to be versus what I think is the best possible case for people who have kind of the mainstream view that I think even they don't know how to articulate their own case.